Hey there, and welcome to our third chapter here. This chapter is going to be on literature reviews, and I'll just be as frank as I can. I mean, a lot of folks don't necessarily find literature reviews to be their favorite part of research. Some folks find it boring, some folks find it laborious. Just in general, it is not the fun, sexy part of research because you're reviewing other people's literature. So we talked about the fact that we do capital R research, we're finding new knowledge and we're publishing new knowledge as opposed to that lowercase r where we're just reading or Googling other things. Part of the research project process is that we have to read what other people have written. So let's talk about why we're doing that. Why are we reviewing other people's literature? Or sometimes you hear people say current literature or recent literature. First of all, now that we've learned how to select a research question and research topic, and we know what we want to research about. We got to figure out what it is that other people have researched about our topic. Uh, as plain as can be, we got to make sure nobody else has researched the exact same thing we want to research, because if they have, what good? We're not making or creating any new knowledge. We also have to find out if there is a gap. And the gap in knowledge, the gap in research is a really, really important part of the process. That gap is looking to see what other people have said about our topic or the topic we're interested in. And how do we fit our research in that little area that they've already talked about? The example that I use a lot in class is that if we're researching, we want to research how streetlights and the presence of streetlights affects crime rates after dark. We got to figure out one, we got to do a literature review and look at all the recent literature using some of those techniques that I talked about last week, Google Scholar and the KU library. We've got to look into that recent research, and one, we got to make sure nobody has done that exact research. If we're interested in doing that in the Midwest, maybe somebody already has a research study called Affects of Streetlights on Crime Rates in Midwestern Towns After Dark. Well, now we're out of luck, right? We were like, oh shoot, we somebody's already done that study. We can't do it again. But there's also something called the gap. And maybe somebody's already done that study in the Midwest and somebody else did that study on the West Coast. Well, you know what? There's a gap in that knowledge because nobody said what that's done in the South. Or nobody has done, they've done crime rates, but they never looked at the way that people feel safe, or they describe how safe they feel based on streetlights. So they may have done a quantitative study, but nobody's done a qualitative study. So that's a gap. A gap is just looking at what other people have done and how can we fit our topic into what they've done so that it's the next step. Kind of like that future research project that we were talking about, the assignment where you had to find whatever those recommendations for future research were. So, like we said last week, we're looking at places like Google Scholar and the KU library to find peer-reviewed studies. In general, we want to find recent. I keep saying that, what's the current literature, the recent literature say about that? Between the last 5, 7, 10 years is usually pretty acceptable. If you're starting to review literature from 15, 20 years ago, that's probably not going to be as applicable. Things change, societies change, science changes. So you want to make sure it's recent literature and that literature is truly recent. The exception to that is something we call seminal works. Seminal works are the first time anybody ever talks about a topic. So for instance, in something I wrote a year or two ago, I talked about a book that had been published in the 1800s. I cited a book from the 1800s. That's because that's the first time anybody had ever talked about that. So it was acceptable. However, in general, we want to keep that 5 to 10 year, no more than 10 years. And you can do that easily in Google Scholar just by clicking the button on the left side that says, it has all the years on it, and you just click it so that it's only the most recent 5 years, only the most recent 10 years. Easy to narrow that down. So let's talk about what we're reading. When we pull up these peer-reviewed studies, you're gonna search by a certain term. In that case of the street lights and the crime rates, I would maybe just type that title in: street lights, crime rates, dark, Midwest, West Coast, South, urban versus rural. I would just use all these different search terms until I started getting returns that really interested me. I look at the title of the article and say, oh, that article looks interesting. So the very first thing I read, title of the article. That's going to tell me a lot about whether or not I want to click on it or not. If I do click on it, I'm going to bring up the full copy of the article. Again, if we're using the KU library or Google Scholars attached to our KU library, we won't have to pay for any of these articles that are available. And first thing we're going to do is read the abstract. Now, I don't do this, so I don't expect you guys to do this. I don't read that entire, 40-page research study. Here's how I do it. I read the abstract. The abstract is just a summary of the study. And if it looks like it's still something I want to use, then I go beyond that from the abstract. Then I go all the way to the end and I look at the findings and the discussion. Like what did they find? If it's something somewhat interesting and I think the findings are something I can use, then I go back up again and I look at the methods section. And I skim over that methods section just to find out how it is they came to those findings. Did they use a quantitative methodology? Did they use a qualitative methodology? Did they use focus groups? Did they use interviews, observations, narrative? What did they use? And that's it. I look at the title, I look at the abstract, I look at the findings and discussion, and then I look at the methods. Boom, I'm done. And then I'm on to the next one. I mean, mind you, we're usually looking at several pages of a literature review in a study, so I don't have time, and I don't expect you guys to read these entire studies. And then as I take these findings, and I see something that I find interesting. So I like the title, I like the abstract, I like the methods, I like the findings. That sounds like something's going to really align with the study that I want to conduct. Boom, I put it in my document. I'm going to save this one for later, because as I talk about all the recent literature, I'm going to list them. I found a study by Jones and Smith that said they found 3 years ago, they found that streetlights had a major impact on crime rates during the day. And then I looked at another study by Joey Schmuckatelli, and he found that streetlights were not an issue, but Ring doorbells were an issue. So they were somewhat supportive of the previous findings. And that's what we're doing. We're going back and forth, finding all these different articles. We're comparing what one person said to what another person said. Did the second person support or refute the findings of that first study? That's what we call synthesizing. We're synthesizing our literature review. We're going through several studies, and we're just talking about one, and we're talking about how one relates to the other one, how they support it, do they refute it, is there a conflict, do they somewhat support it, somewhat conflicted, and we're going to go through that, study after study after study after study, and that is what a literature review looks like. So the last thing I will leave you with, very, very important. I've seen this before on more than one occasion. There is a temptation to use ChatGPT, and not just in writing. I'm not talking about just plugging the prompt in and using it for an assignment. Some folks I've seen on more than one occasion. Some folks will say, "Find me all the recent literature on this topic," and they use that as their prompt. And in fact, I've done it as an experiment just to see what it would come up with after I started seeing other folks do it. And I'm here to tell you, it will lie to you. It will flat out lie to you. AI, ChatGPT will flat out lie to you. Try it. I encourage you to try it. Not for an assignment. Not don't turn it in, but play around with it. What you'll find is that if you say, give me all the recent literature for a literature review on the affects of streetlights and crime rates, it will give you 20 scholarly articles for you to review. And what you'll find is that none of those scholarly articles exist. It will flat out make up articles. Articles of people that actually did publish things but didn't publish together. It'll say Smith and Jones published an article 3 years ago in the Journal of Streetlight Criminology on page 35. And you'll go to the Journal of Streetlight Criminology, page 35, and there is no art. It's not even the beginning of an article. It's the middle of an article. And Jones published something about streetlights, and Smith published something about crime rates, but they've never published together. They don't even know each other. But it's what's called hallucinating. ChatGPT will hallucinate and just compile all this information and flat out give you fake journal articles. So that is it's a very dangerous world to get into when you're trying to use ChatGPT for literature review. And unfortunately, it's happened in the past. But I just want to give you that heads up because might as well hear about it now rather than find out the hard way. So with that being said, I look forward to the rest of this week and your submissions. And if you have any questions, go ahead and reach out.